building a rig, is that what you're doing?
Well, I have no involvement in it.
Yes,
You should be all set.
we can probably get rid of this too.
Eventually, yeah, but they jumped on it. That's great.
Okay.
That's further.
All right. Beauty. Thank you.
I mean, I advise.
Enjoy.
Yeah, I think Kateria had comments about it. Ask him, he has opinions.
I think yeah, I'll have to ask him. Yeah, I get a kick out of following the discussion on LLM.
I had lay people walk up to me yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I read a fair amount about
Give you a little bit of investment advice while you're at it. I just think it's so all overblown. All of it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's like we're talking marginal improvements in individuals' productivity. I was painting Barb about it too, because so he's on leave right now. So he took a sabbatical and then he wanted to stay on for a long reasons of leave. He's working for Fastly. I think they control, like they direct something like 20 to 30% of all data traffic on a given day. And so he's doing AI research with them, and yes, so I think this is all of the bodies up to step.
All I heard is that.
Well, Jesse's waiting for the next AI winter.
Yeah, well, it's like a conversation I had this morning. I don't actually know where Fast is based out of, but I'm sure if he's remote. I don't think he's ever gone into an office. Yeah. Yeah, well, so he lives in Irvine. We meet up to UCLA. And so he would go in like 2 days a week and he was teaching. But I'm sure that in part that has decreased the enjoyment of working at USC. Or maybe it's interesting. All of your messages are up right now.
Yeah, we can check them all out.
Have you worked on that stuff?
I have, and I was going to send it to you either today or tomorrow.
Nice.
As I'm walking my way over, I was like, oh, shoot, I haven't said it.
Yeah, Theo, yes, that's Theo, yes. Welcome to give the seminar. Looking forward to it. Yeah.
I just got that one.
Closer to spring. Yeah, I noticed today, definitely. Really nice. Yeah. As soon as the sun starts going down, I get very sleepy. Yeah. I appreciate the longer days.
Out the way.
I like really ones, yeah. Yeah, you can check it out.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to our first seminar of the spring 2025 semester. It's my pleasure to introduce Phil Pardey from Department of Applied Economics. He's got a couple collaborators here today. Brian Runk who is Associate Director of Geocommons over in Geography, Environment, and Society. Kevin Silverstein, who is a Senior Analyst of Informatics with the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute. And they're going to tell us about GEMS Informatics and how it can help the soil, water, and climate community research. This sort of evolved from some conversations that Philip and I had through a couple of AI climate meetings. And during those meetings, Philip was showing some of the power of GEMS, and I thought it'd be a really good opportunity for our faculty to see some of these tools. So thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and a delight to be here, and terrific to see everyone in person. We have a departmental seminar, and the room's a lot thinner than this. Everyone just dials in, so great to see so many people here face to face. We thought we'd give a three-way talk to try and maximise our intersection with the interests of your department. And so I'll lead off with a brief overview of what GEMS actually is, and just highlight a couple of the services that we offer in GEMS, and then turn it over to Kevin Silverstein in the first instance, who leads one of the labs within GEMS, the Predictive Analytics for Crop Systems Lab, and Brian, who leads the Real-Time Geoinformatics Systems Lab. So GEMS was hatched as an idea around 2015, 2016, when Kevin and I used to often walk home from work together, and we ended up standing in his driveway for 2 or 3 hours and came up with the idea of GEMS. We'd been near neighbours for many years, and he worked at some place called MSI, which I had very loose associations with, and I was here in the CFANS campus, and we were looking to see about trying to develop some strategic opportunities between MSI and CFANS, and to leverage the relative strengths of both of those entities and try and move the college along through that. And so GEMS' vision and objective is to make genomic, environmental, management, and socioeconomic data interoperable for a purpose, that is to generate actionable information for both scientific and application at the farming level and beyond along agricultural value chains, and to promote new innovation partnerships. So we see data as a clear asset, and we spend a lot of money, all of us, generating lots of data. I think we spend less time thinking about how to strategically use that information, both to leverage partnerships at a scientific level, but also to translate that science into actions that accelerate growth and transform food and ag systems. And so we're working across these G by E by M by S areas, and often the data in those disciplinary domains is very siloed, number one, and it's often different types of data, number two. And so the first bullet there about integrating these complex data is easier said than done, and we've spent a lot of time trying to engage with folks around the college and elsewhere, and to think about the sort of complexities that confront us with respect to integrating data, where we often spend about 70 to 80% of our time generating and organising data to get it into a form that's research ready, and then a lot less of our time actually doing the fun part of the research. And so we're trying to help try and develop some capabilities in the college to try and flip that equation a bit, so that we spend more time on the fun analytics and the impact side of the equation, and getting data into a research ready context. The other area is to try and think about how we can scale the impacts of our own labs and our college beyond our own sort of general scientific domains, and to think about cross-lab and cross-university and public to private partnerships, so that we can actually make scalable sorts of analytics, and hence a big reason for our teaming up with MSI, that a lot of the analytics we do and the pathway to scalability is to engage with the group over there. And a key one for us is repeatable and verifiable workflows. So I suspect if most people are like me, we have lots of analytical little silos dotting around in our career that we fail to sort of pay due diligence to with respect to metadata management and documentation and things of that nature, the boring stuff that gets in the way of doing some fun research. And so how can we think about well-documented and versioned data sets and coded workflows, so that we can actually scale those workflows up to be repeatable? And clearly not all workflows and all analyses are worth scaling or worth putting into repeatable and verifiable workflows, but key ones are, and we think that from our conversations across the college, there's lots of opportunity for the college making bigger impacts than it currently is in that regard. So GEMS is a joint venture between CFANS and Research Computing, and so that's encompassing both the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute and USpatial. And there's a quick look at the FTEs by face and by count. There's about 12 or so FTEs in CFANS and around 7 in Research Computing. And we have a couple of long-standing collaborations at Macalester College here in Minnesota. And we also have, we've formed a strategic MOU between the university and the college and Stellenbosch University, which is the top-ranked agri-science faculty in sub-Saharan Africa, and are using that as a way of leveraging partnerships, not just into South Africa, but into Africa as well. And particularly, there's a lot of effort that we've done in trying to think about bridging public to private partnerships. I'm about to give a talk next week, in a couple of weeks in Australia, and just putting together some brand new data on who actually does ag R&D. And it turns out in the US, around 70% of the agri-food research is done by the private sector now, not the public sector. Our funding in the public sector is now now less than it was in 1980 in real terms. And the current administration seems hell-bent on cutting our funding even further with their holds on grants at the moment. And so we have to really think about how we can leverage that public-private divide to try and get impact. And so you'll see in a lot of the work that we do, we're very conscious of that and trying to how do we still maintain sort of our public good efforts, but also try and help create value for in the private sector, and not least farmers who are all private entities. And so the way we're structured in GEMS institutionally is a research-driven data science service centre is how we see ourselves. And so I won't go through those details there, but you can see we've got 6 labs that leverage the expertise of people we've hired within GEMS, but they've been hired with a view to where we can try and maximise intersections across different departments and different research activities in the college. And then we have developed over the last several years 5 service areas. And just very briefly, those 5 service areas are divvied up into a GEMS platform, which is a data sharing and analysis platform that we've developed, and that's hosted within MSI with a very specific structure that allows us, again, to bridge this public and private divide in food and agriculture R&D. Brian will talk and give you some oversights on some of the work he does within his lab and also within the service centre, GEMS Sensing, which is sort of field-based sensors and data services. We've been developing a service line called GEMS Exchange, where we've been developing data streaming services to try and enhance interoperability between data so that you can plug and play them into your research pipelines. And we've been working for some time to try and, with folks sitting in the room here and others, to try and enhance digital and data science education around the college, and have a bunch of courses underway already that we've had running for 2.5 years, that are mainly online courses. Some are taken autonomously, others are instructor-led, and we've been having a larger conversation about how to try and improve data science education around the college. And then finally, on GEMS Solutions, we often get approached by folks across the college and the campus, but also firms that want sort of let the chips fall where they may, advice about what's appropriate strategies for dealing with data and data analytic problems. And so we initiate those conversations on a free basis, but if they start to scale up and take a fair bit of time, then we have a Controller's Office approval for consulting service activities. So just quickly returning to this notion of data as an asset, increasingly a lot of grant applications, but also in the private sector, require an explicit data management approach to be laid out in those grant proposals. And a lot of those proposals adhere to FAIR data principles, which is sort of findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data. And we are fairer than fair, or strive to be fairer than fair. Our E is ethical, and so we know we're dealing with a lot of farm data in our space, and there's lots of appropriate jitterness about amongst farmers as to who's accessing their data and who's using that data and who's deploying that data. And so we have to be much more mindful about how we provide access to data that has either data sensitivities around it or formal IP associated with it. And so just putting data in open data repositories is far from sufficient if we're going to incentivize people to provide data to us where they have either IP or data privacy and sensitivity issues associated with it. As I mentioned earlier, just reusable data is a great end goal in itself, but trying to get reproducible workflows where we're pairing version data with versioned analytics is a key effort that we're striving for. And so we have a lot of built-in technical security by dint of the fact that we're working with colleagues over in MSI. In fact, everyone in GEMS takes HIPAA training, and although HIPAA only applies to health-related data, and there's no legislative equivalent for privacy and security aspects associated with agricultural data at the federal level, myself and the Dean work with the state legislation, and in 2018 we got some, I think it's one-of-a-kind legislation in the US that deems that any identifiable data that sits within the GEM sphere is deemed legally private and non-public. And that's important because if we didn't have that legislative privacy, we wouldn't be able to warrant that we could maintain privacy of that data because we'd be foiable by the fact that we're a public organisation. So even though we might have all of that data managed in a very secure way, technically, legally, it's potentially foible, and that's not the case now. Kevin will describe some work that we're doing where that was completely essential. Without that, we wouldn't be doing some major lines of work that we're doing. And so we're striving up the top there around this notion of bridging the divide between completely open and public data and completely private data, but it's the sweet spot in the middle that we're really particularly interested in, which I call purposely pulled data, where that data is being pulled for a purpose with the consent and focus of the partners, so that we're using the data as a way of drawing together research teams or research entities, public and private or public to public, to engage in data-driven sort of innovation. And so just as an example, we have been part of the effort that's helped incentivize PepsiCo working on campus here. They have 10 to 12 scientists working across various areas of the campus, and we do some fee-for-service type work for them on sort of a non-disclosure agreement. They put in something like $2+ million a year across the college. And then we also do some other work that leads to more open and shareable data products and so forth. And so a whole range of work that we're doing, but lots of others around the campus are doing, underpinned by the GEMS platform. And some of you have probably got NIFA funding, but also funding through FAR, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. They have various research consortia that they support, which are public-private research consortia, and we actually support 8 of those research consortia, which have about 20 members. Again, each of those research consortia pool their data, and they decide who gets access to that data. If we're just hosting that data, we can't even see it because all the data sitting on our platform is encrypted. It's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in flight. If we become a formal member of that research team or that research consortia, then we can get access to that data, but that access is mediated by the structure that team particularly decides as to who sees what data sets and so forth. And so if data is put into the GEMS platform, it's not our data, it's the data provider's data, and they get to decide the deployment of that data. So there's a couple of key aspects of the platform is we use Globus, and folks in the room have used Globus to transfer large data sets. Those data sets are transferred, as I said, in an encrypted fashion. It's a very effective way of transferring very large data sets. Kevin and I have done some tests sitting down at CIMMIT in Mexico with really fluky connectivity and being able to get those data sets to transfer and round out and do checksums and so forth in a satisfactory manner. And as I mentioned, the platform is designed so that within each team structure, in a sense, the leader of that team, say a lab PI, gets to decide all of their postdocs and students and so forth as to what sort of read, write and edit and delete aspects they have with respect to the data that's sitting within that team structure. And that's important if you're trying to think about accumulating data within your lab and you want to open up aspects of that data to students, for example, but you don't want students to necessarily delete 10 years of your hard-won data efforts accidentally, then you can actually manage that in a very structured way and manage the privileges within the platform. The good news is, the platform is available both internally and externally to subscribers. We worked with Jim Wilgenbush, Director of Research Computing, and MSI are absorbing the costs of the basic lab level subscription to that, so that you can see the CPU and terabyte allocation. So on a basic subscription, you're getting that for free. You just need to sign up. And if you want to bring in other partners and scale to bigger data sets, then for the internal pricing is up there, and it's really pretty reasonable. If it's lab access being provided to external partners, there's an external service organisation price for them. And so that's the one out. You can go to our website and encourage you to do so if you want to, and inquire with us, and we could sign you on to the GEMS platform. On GEMS Exchange, as I mentioned, we've been working and keeping an eye on data sets that in our labs require to do their work, but with an eye to other areas around campus and interests of people, and building out a set of APIs which have very standard interfaces. So often when you're going and grabbing data from various APIs, there's all sorts of machinations you need to do to get those APIs to be working. And so we've developed a very standardized API. We've got hopefully lots of good documentation between these APIs now with worked examples to help people get up to speed and think about how they work through those APIs. And each of those particular APIs have multiple data sets within them, or many of them do. And so again, we're providing that for now on a test basis, on a free to use basis. And so you can just dial up and access those APIs through that link there. And one of the key things we've been doing around interoperability is thinking about a lot of the data we deal with is, and particularly probably in this department, is spatially explicit. And so how do we project and standardize the spatial representation of our data? And so we've developed this thing called the GEMS grid, which is a discrete hierarchical gridding system that can allow you to go from 1 square metre to 10 square metres, etc., up to 36 square kilometres and down again in a very repeatable, structured fashion. So, and so there's an open repository with that functionality that we've developed that's up there at that place. And I'd encourage you, if you're interested, Kevin helped lead the team that developed that. And so we could, and that's openly available for you. And so the exchange, not every element on the exchange, but most of the elements on the exchange are gridded into this standardized structural form so that you can then readily integrate them into your research flows. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to give you a bit of a description about his lab's work.
Thanks a lot, Phil. The introduction there. As Phil suggested, there are several different labs within GEMS, and each of us leads with those labs, like Brian and myself, kind of direct research that's collaborative with lots of other groups. And the couple that I'm going to outline here, I'm going to just walk through each of these real quickly because I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot overview of what we're up to. But I have in brackets there kind of who we're collaborating on each of these projects for. Like the first one is actually with multiple different groups, including academics, actually companies and farmer cooperatives. But some of them have government NGOs and so on. So we'll walk through each of these. The first one is actually kind of the holy grail, I think, of plant breeding, and that's, can you actually predict genetics by environment interactions and say, hey, I've got a particular set of traits, not just yield, but other traits, and I want to be able to decide, oh yeah, I could actually direct my particular, this particular variety would be the best to grow in that specific region, or flip the thing and basically say for a particular region, which varieties are the best that I could grow there. So it's a challenging problem. And basically, if you take a look at these test plots, for example, here you have different varieties grown under exactly the same weather conditions and soil conditions, et cetera. And yet each of those patches represents basically one variety. And there's so many differences in height. There's differences in whether they're heading earlier or later, whether you actually, have bleaching to some degree of and all sorts of different conditions. And so what we decided is we took a particular model that we are using. In our particular case, we use a Bayesian prediction model, and the inputs to the model are really the trial sites where we have weather and soils data and a whole long vector of different properties of temperature, max, min, at particular times. You've got pressure, you've got soil measurements, things of that sort. So it's about 60 different soil variables that we're taking from Surgo at this particular case, just for simplicity. And then each of our varieties, we have about 10,000 markers. So in this particular case, we were using wheat, and for 10 years of wheat data that we gathered from Jim Anderson, we were closely collaborating with. We also did something similar with Kevin Smith and Barley. So we wanted to predict yield, percent protein, and actually a whole variety of different things, baking quality and things of that sort. So, we had about 9 to 10 years of data. We broke it up actually through a subset of that, training data 2012 through 2017. We're able to, back predict, what it should be, not with reasonable accuracy. And then to try to test in 2018, our R-squareds are about 0.48. This is something in development in progress. It turns out that it's a very difficult thing to do, to predict future, how things will do in the future. It's pretty easy if you actually predict within the same year different locations, and you say leave one out, cross-validation, and choose that. But that's because the same weather systems here go through actually North Dakota, go through Iowa and various other places. And so it's a very that's an easy problem. We were able to get 0.95 R values, and but to predict next year's weather is probably not the right question to be asking. It's probably which are the most stable over a 5-year period, and I can say that these are going to be the best varieties in this area, and these are going to be worse, just things of that sort. But anyway, it's something we're continuing to work on, and a challenging problem. Crop identification is another important problem, and this is kind of, if you take the cropland data layer provided by NASS, and they actually each year they give a prediction about what, actually a post-retrodiction about what was planted the previous year. So they kind of look, and you have all sorts of different both crops and non-crops like pasture and grass and fallow cropland and things of that sort. The issue with them is we want to actually predict what crops are grown, and the CDL is actually released January, February after the growing season ends, and it's not a lot you can do with that. What we want to be able to do is actually make a prediction for next year, for this coming year, ahead of time of what's actually going to happen. And for that, what we kind of used in this particular problem was we kind of looked. Well, first of all, I guess the motivation is that for insurance risk, estimating crop losses, all sorts of problems you would need to know. If you're looking at disease in plants, when you look at the propagation of how a disease is going, it makes it the actual spatial distribution of what crops are planted where is a big difference. Just like when fires burn, if you have a big buffer, then that spatial difference in distribution is critical. So we really need to know what crops are grown where, so we know what's susceptible and what's not to diseases that are coming through. So to tackle this problem, I'll just briefly say we've used kind of like your predictive things that you use when you're typing on your phone. You say you type a word and it already knows what the next word is going to be. When we actually look at cropping histories from CDL from years before, you can use that information and a variety of other informations to inform at any particular pixel what is being going to be next year. And you can do it with decent accuracy. We're still working on that one. This one, lake water quality, is a critical one for a lot of issues, and we're working with Leif Olmundsen in forestry. Leif Olmundsen had basically using satellite information, was able to make high fidelity predictions, but it took him about maybe 3 to 5 years to go through all 10,000 lakes in Minnesota initially to actually have a map, and he would update every 3 or 5 years. So David Porter in our group, what he has done is he's sped that up to basically do this pretty much almost continuously. So Sentinel satellite, they used to use Landsat. Sentinel is, there's 2 satellites there, and on average it's about every 5 days that they actually report something. The problem is a lot of pixels are going to be clouded out. You can't actually see, too opaque to be able to make any judgment. But over a month's time, you can pretty much have a measurement of the quality of the lake over that time period. And so, we've built these models so that they run continuously, and we have pretty much all the way back to 2016 or so, every month of the growing season, pretty much from March to November, what the quality of every one of the 10,000 plus lakes in Minnesota are. So that's where we end up. A lot of those are ground truth. I should say some of it is ground truth using Secchi depth. There's also 3 different measurements we do: chlorophyll, CDOM, as well as Secchi depth. And then we have these great maps that we can use. And so those have been used by a lot of folks. We want to make those useful, so Phil talked about those GEMS exchange things. We actually have a whole lot of data within there. We have pretty much every waterway in Minnesota, so that we can actually track from a given farmland. These happen to be farms that we have information on with a collaboration that Phil mentioned, proprietary information that we wouldn't be able to get access to if we didn't have that assurance that all data is private, non-public. These are actually farms that the Minnesota Department of Ag is collecting. I'll talk about it at that subsequent slide. That's what those red, basically geometric shapes are. And we can actually track pretty much from any farm down a catchment to what the lake or lakes that are in that catchment are, and identify what downstream, where things would flow. Say if there were leakage of say nitrate or phosphate or various other things going down that way. So that'll play into this one right here. Satellite data cleaning is just a prerequisite we had to do in order to get that pipe. Not the water quality, it uses a different pipeline, but when we actually start looking at that individual, say, farm plots, if you look at a field, that if we want to look at the certain characteristics of that field, whether using tillage or not, we need to be able to see those fields in a consistent manner. And you see, this is going from the growing season I mentioned, March all the way to November. This is every 5 days, but you see some days there's really just completely blacked out, especially early in the season. And some days it's not completely blacked out, but you see a lot of atmospheric mess in some of these slides. So David developed a really good algorithm that is able to do imputation both in space and in time to be able to fill in some of that information. And then we can then get something that's going to be very, very good input for machine learning algorithms. It turns out without that, we can't get good accuracy in recognizing structures down from AI. With that, we get really good accuracies in blinds, leave out whole sets of predictions. So we have a lot of clean data sets using these algorithms. Why is cleaning days necessary? I think I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but we actually keep track of how far is it for every pixel from, is that a real imputed point? Is that 5 days out, 10 days out, 15 days, 20 days out? It's important to keep track of how far out the real information is. This one, second to last thing I'll mention in this whirlwind here is farm management practice. This builds on lake water quality that I mentioned. That we work with the Minnesota Department of Ag because we're very interested in the best management practices that folks are implementing. Strip till, no till, for example, cover crops, filter strips, alternative tile intake, a whole bunch of other things that they're using. That's a strip till example. And the reason is because the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program that Brad Redlin leads within the Department of Ag, they certify farmers who on a voluntary basis who want to say, hey, in return for 10 years of regulatory immunity to new rules that might come about, that we'll let you look at all our property, tell us everything, a complete audit of all of our practices that we're doing, and we'll commit to adding one more, adding a new best management practice. And with that, you know, they have certified at this point 1,500 growers, and there are over 1 million acres across Minnesota. It's only about 5% of the acreage, but it's still it's growing and growing. It's been going on for 10 years now. So the nice thing about that is we're allowed to get we can just have a complete dump of everything they have because of that. Because of the fact that we have, but we can't actually share that with other people. We can't publish at the moment or anything like that. We're going to try to recertify farmers in our next agreement. Right now, we can just use it to help them to inform their policy. But it's an important thing because now we can use a lot of the information that we've developed to estimate trends in best management adoption. We can estimate who we can predict, you know, with that 5% of training, the other 95%, what are they doing? And we can start looking at estimates of what is their impact for adoption of BMPs and actual pollution of lakes downstream, because we have information that downstream, we have the full connection of everywhere in between. So that's the last of those vignettes. I'm just going to show you another way that we could work with you. I mean, we have, you know, those kinds of things are stuff we started with ideas with other folks. And the stuff we're working collaboratively, this is, for example, with the Forever Green initiative. They had, you know, they have an issue of they're planting all the time in different plots, and it's important to see how their cover crops or various things that they're using are impacted by previous crops that were planted on that land at ROCs or whatever. That I just developed a schema, which this is, in conjunction with them. It's did some back and forth with them to try to actually get an idea of something that could actually answer questions that they care about. And this is just an example of, you know, a schema that I developed with them. Pass it over. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I know so many of you, and I have such a deep respect for the work that happens in this department. Many of you are true giants in your field, and so I really am honored to be here and to talk with you. So I'm going to build on what Phil and Kevin have laid out. So we heard a little bit about the center at large and what our mission is. And then we heard about these excellent examples of how we partner with folks to move the needle forward on these various things. And what I'm going to share about is in my lab in the center, we focus really on real-time geoinformation systems. And so our artifact and our focus of study is the technology system itself. So we have two main goals that relates to advancing the state of the art in GIS. First, we're really concerned with developing applied solutions. So we want our things to be used. And then second, we do care about finding generalizable principles when we can, right? We're not so bold to think that we always will, but we like to do that when it's possible. So there's lots of folks that get to flow through the lab as, you know, students and postdocs and staff flow through your labs. And so I'm going to present on work that, you know, in some cases I just was able to be a mentor and be able to be a PI in a proposal, but the work was done by somebody else. And I'll call those folks out as I go through. So like I said, we really are focused on a technology system. And what we care about is this question of how do we get all this disparate sensor system data into an integrated system? And this is really a fit for purpose system. How do we run real-time models on that or near real time? And then how do we make relevant recommendations and predictions? And then we do think about human cognition, because it turns out that how you display that information dramatically affects people's willingness to actually act on that information. And that will be your satisfaction. For the most part, we're kind of omnivorous in the way that we seek partnerships, like Phil talked about. We have lots of partnerships in the public sector with small and large nonprofits, county government, regional government, state government, and federal. We also, though, like to work with private entities when possible. So some of the examples that I'll walk through here. The first one is the Irrigation Management Assistant tool. So this is in partnership with one of the faculty members in Soil, Water, and Climate, Vasu Sharma, as well as Jeff Strock and Lindsay Peace are both co-PIs in this proposal. So a little context, we were approached by local soil, water, and conservation districts who had developed a tool for their growers, specifically in Benton County. And they said, hey, we developed this wonderful tool. It works for one county. Wouldn't it be great if this could go across the entire state? And we said, hey, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to go talk with LCCMR and see if we can get funding to then scale that up. And then this becomes a research platform for the university to begin to think about how do we do extension in a digital way. So currently we have roughly 5,000 acres under management that are actively using this tool on a day-to-day basis. And the guts of it are related to field water balance. So the research side of this is that while the systems are running in part off of APIs that Kevin has helped develop, what we're able to do is in parallel run an app that only a few people see. And we can then deploy our machine learning models in real time, see how they perform in comparison to what the current app is. And then if it turns out over time that in particular Vasu feels comfortable updating the model that's going to drive those recommendations, then we can port that over right away into that application. And so to put into perspective, the app originally was with a single county, and so Respec, who's a local engineering shop, we work with them as well on the front end app development. By working with Kevin's APIs, it allowed us really in about 2 to 3 months to go from that countywide application to a statewide application. The other benefit that comes with that is that we are able, with those same data flows, then to port that information to other states, and that's really where we have a line of sight for future funding. One of the things that we do along the way, and this is work that Samiksha Subide has led, a PhD student in the department here, co-advised by Dr. Sharma and I. The limited data coverage required that we approach the data input a little bit differently. So typically we're relying on Mesonet data for inputs to drive estimates of evapotranspiration in particular. And so we had a lot of concerns around whether or not moving over to these new, quote, state of the art, right? We all know state of the art. We wanted to actually verify that we're getting as good of fits as we need in order to roll this out. And so this is just an example of ensuring, so we did both direct evaluation in this paper, so looking at the input parameters, as well as then what I call downstream. So we look at how that error does or doesn't propagate through the models, because sometimes the models absorb some of that uncertainty. And we can see good fits in terms of what the gridded product and what the MDA Mesonet was able to provide. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. That project was focused on irrigation management. This is a project that is PI'd by Eric Watkins out of the Department of Horticulture, but it draws in faculty from across the college and the university. C. Yang, who I think is on faculty in this department as well, is a co-PI on this project. So we partnered with them and specifically with turfgrass managers to get after this envirotyping problem. And so they said, we want to understand what's happening below the soil surface on all these golf course greens. We think that that there's something going on, and that this is kind of the level of vagueness we approached, related to off-gassing. We think that there might be something going on related to that is temperature or soil water driven, that's leading to extreme amounts of spatial variation in winter kill events. And so for those of you who don't know, like a golf course green is very, very expensive to establish. And so if you have a winter kill event, people will frequently lose their jobs over these events that they really can't control. So we're looking for any information they can to understand what those drivers are. So Bobby Schultz really was the lead on the sensor development in my group. And so he went through, and so he took a Sensorian device, so NIST traceable, NDIR based, and he moved it through 3 different versions. And then we validated the device both in lab, in test environment here out at TRO. And then since 2020, we've scaled that device really across the northern latitudes that are of importance to this project. In order to do that, we had to also scale the logging systems. And so we started off with this version 1 Palmer. And so this was a LoRa-based system, so more of a machine-to-machine type communication. We then moved over into 4G, working off the particle series. And then finally here in V3, and this is really where we're pretty stable for the loggers that we're running in the lab. These are manufactured by Caltronics Design and Manufacturing in Stacy, Minnesota. And so they're an ISO 9001 certified shops who have good quality control. I'd still say V3, these are research devices. So we're managing, plus or minus, 50, around 300 devices, with connected sensors all over the place. But scaling beyond that can become challenging just because of some quirks of the way. So we are going to be looking to be doing a V4 in order to scale more. What we can do with that data then to start is like hierarchical clustering to identify these envirotypes that might be relevant for other aims in the project. Here's an example of 2 of those clusters. In addition with this project, we can use all of this sensor data and couple it with something like the soil moisture active passive satellite mission data, and then we can statistically downscale that using pretty vanilla machine learning techniques like random forest. We get phenomenal fits. I think that this is a great option for really any research project where we want to know about soil moisture across a really wide area in a specific land cover type. So this is a 4 kilometer resolution, and we can get really tight fits for a golf course green, right? So you're essentially like way overfitting it, but for our purposes, that's a good thing. Ultimately, what we're doing with this data coming out is we're developing models. So this is just an exemplar. This is the work that's currently under development now. But we'll get these descriptions. So we collaborate with USpatial on this project. So this awesome spatial surveying system that goes out. Golf course superintendents are filling it out regularly. And they'll put information in about winter damage events. So winter injury occurred in the low spots. You even get a date. I love it when I get a date associated with the rainstorm. The bent grass survived. POA showed the winter injury, so on and so forth. What we can do then is we can mark when they noticed that there was increased risk, and we can run models then against that perceived risk. And our first step is to get to matching perceptions of risk, because at the current time we don't have sufficient ground truth data to really scale up the machine learning techniques. Over the next few years, we expect we will. We also have historic surveys that are out where we're going through the old literature to find these broad winter damage events. And you can see a second model. A big thing we like to do is push into the extension programs. And so we've done this extensively with TURF, where we go to field days, we present on devices, and we really want to illustrate how it is that the program is essential in leading that work. And then we'd really like to showcase how we're, showcase what the programs are doing. Okay, we're gonna shift gears one more time. And so you got a sense as to the kind of a project that we've scaled a lot. This is a project that's very early on. It was in collaboration with Patrick Ewing at USDA ARS when he was at Brookings. He's now in Vermont. And the question was, and really we're taking an engineering approach here. How good can we do curve fitting between biomass and carbon to nitrogen ratio in field with uncalibrated digital numbers coming off of essentially what you get off of a cell phone? The application idea is like, well, we can go out, we can collect this data, and and we we can refit these models pretty quickly during your growing season, you can imagine that powering an app if it holds up. And so what we did was we collected a fair amount of field imagery. We then went through multi-model comparison, specifically looking at these different indices, and then we ended up with pretty good predictions of biomass, nitrogen, and C to N ratio. We can go into detail about this. I'm just trying to move a little quickly just because of time. Shifting gears again. Again, we focus on building systems. We like to build systems and think about how to build them better. Here we're building systems where the input data are people's perceptions of what locations matter for conservation and for conservation planning. And so here we helped build the technology that allowed for each of these groups to be putting in their priority areas, collecting their perspectives on what was an important area, and then allowing that to be integrated up on the screen. And there was a process that was around this that allowed for social learning and interaction. Complementary to that, we then came alongside Hennepin County, where they had some existing prioritization models. And we said, well, how sensitive are those models to the weighting schemes that you're putting in them? So using traditional multi-criteria decision analysis is what was happening here. And then we asked, well, these are computationally really expensive to run, so can we approximate these models that you think are pretty awesome and reflect what you want to see prioritized? Can we approximate them with statistical machine learning models? That's all wrapped up in a larger process. I won't go into that. Also with Hennepin County, work that we're doing is focused on their climate action plan. And so in 2021, Hennepin County passed a net zero goal for 2050. About 10% of structural emissions are expected to be sequestered starting in 2050. It's a lot of CO2e. The challenge is that they lack this local and regional scale data and models to support the planning and their ongoing MMRV efforts. So typically how these climate action plans are written is, the county has gets a mandate, staff then have budget, and then they hire an external consulting firm. And then that consulting firm has a unique set of expertise that they bring into the writing of that climate action plan. In many cases, that expertise is around energy and transportation. There's not so much expertise when it comes to natural systems and the sequestration side. So that those things kind of then fall out in the analysis after the fact. And so what we did was we started off by analyzing what that climate action plan said. And then from there we asked, can our models, so given the best that we have for this, for evaluating this, can we get within an order of magnitude of confidence? And then second, if we can't, can we establish minimum and maximums in terms of bounding the potential outcomes? And the goal then is that if, depending on where we go, we can provide AI heuristics for decision-making under uncertainty. I'll show some preliminary results, work that's ongoing, that just illustrates how we're collaborating with them. And so we said that there's many sources of uncertainty that go into these typical greenhouse gas calculators. And so here we only focus on carbon. And so we took 3 different land cover classification schemes. Each of them have their own kind of uncertainty. There is class uncertainty in terms of the matching of the classes to the specific coefficients. And so we end up then with a standardized and more generalized version of each of these. Down here then, we've collated all of the carbon inventories that we could get our hands on, and those come from a variety of sources. We use the general principle of, if someone reasonable might say this ought be included, we will include this in our database. And then from these together, we're able to create 243 different potential sequestration and storage scenarios, which we felt represents a first start to establishing the uncertainty in the estimates. So from this then, we can see what the average what the average amount of storage and sequestration is going to look like in Hennepin County. And we get these nice distributions out, and so we can start to talk about the uncertainty. And so the first question of, can we get within an order of magnitude estimates? Can we do a Fermi analysis? And the answer is no. Can we do min-max with some reasonableness? Yeah, we can. And this then allows us to place this 2050 goal within kind of like, if we're going to be really, really, positive, or if we're going to be really, really positive, we're going to be really, really negative, and how we're going to interpret where we are. Layered on top of that, and so here in the dotted lines, you can see the estimates that came from each of our land cover products. And then you can see here, these are other products that have been satellite-derived products or model-based products that, that we've overlaid the time series of. And again, we're trying to establish bounds of reasonable expectation, and then see where the policy objective falls in this. And so here's Met Council they're going to be releasing their report soon, so you can see what their estimate is, and how that compares. This is all work that's ongoing, and I'm very excited about this because the uncertainties are pretty extreme here, and that has implications for really day-to-day management and what strategies are prioritized. Okay, the last, I believe this is the last thing that I'll talk about. We also then are sometimes just focused on like data wrangling and integration systems to try to make these analyses more easier. And so this is work that Logan Gall has led, and I should say Alexei Razanov, who is in my group, was doing the work primarily with Hennepin County. Tom Glancy and then Mikey Kantar, University of Hawaii. This is focused on integrating data from NOAA, so the climate data, the NCLIM data, which is based on FTP, coming off an FTP server, and then Ameriflux-based data. And the way that this is set up is that this all lives local on an analyst's computer, and then as you need new areas of interest, you say, hey, data manager, go get me this area of interest. Anything that overlaps with previous areas of interest that the analyst had requested in the past won't be re-downloaded. And so it's just stored there and remembered, and then only new data is pulled. This is something we're interested in building on more, and really finding ways to manage these data.
There are questions around, there are questions, so if we were to make this broadly available, there's questions around whether or not they're following all of the licensing agreements, because it's very complex with the Ameriflux. Yeah.
Okay. Because generally what happens is when somebody requests data, and this happens literally many times per day, I get an email that says what the intended user is going to move to with that data. So I was just kind of curious if that's would be built into your, this whole process would still happen?
It would have to, because we have anything that we would move beyond like an idea, hey, this is cool. We would ensure full compliance with the licenses. Yeah. Yeah, and with Ameriflux, that is a challenge. So honestly, we probably would not include that moving forward unless we could find a good way to work with that. Okay. And I know it's different between the base versus the processed and yeah, and so there's some discretion and some judgment that. And since that's something you're interested in, we'd be interested in talking about it. Yeah.
This is great, and thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say something about the platform itself. And I think some of you